Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, September 30th, 2015, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting at long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday. And it looks like it's going to be a rocky time for the next few days, at least if you are in Syria or if you're in Washington, D.C., running around in circles, banging your head against the marble and wondering just what the heck happened to the U.S. agenda in the Mideast here. Now, as you're probably already aware, it's all over the corporate media, of course, Russia has started military operations against ISIS. And in this case, unlike the United States of America, Russia's actually attacking ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And I'm sure those hired mercenaries on the ground are saying, what's going on? We were told we weren't actually going to be shot at by the U.S., but the U.S. is not calling the shots there anymore. Now, for those of you who are a little late to what's going on in Syria and trying to figure out what's going on, we created a handy-dandy explanation graphic. It's posted to the front of WhatReallyHappened.com. I encourage you to copy it off and send it to all your friends. The war in Syria. 1. The U.S. claims to be in Syria to fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda. To do this, the U.S. has been arming ISIS and Al-Qaeda while bombing the declared enemy of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. 2. Russia claims to be in Syria to fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda. To do this, they're actually bombing ISIS and Al-Qaeda. 3. Syria asked the Russians for help. 4. Syria did not ask the U.S. for help. That should pretty much clarify things. By the way, the corporate media is already dropping the terms ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they're talking about Russia attacking the Syrian opposition. They're trying to grant them an aura of legitimacy, to put them on an equal moral standing with Bashar al-Assad. There is no real Syrian opposition other than the U.S. government itself, which has been trying for 4 years to remove Bashar al-Assad and put in a puppet government. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, there's no moderates in Syria, and the Free Syrian Army is ISIS. And that's why you see weapons transferred to ISIS and back and forth, because it's the same, it's two sides of the same coin. Mike,
it's all hired mercenaries. 95% of the Free Syria Army are not Syrian.
I don't know if you got this news yet, but the Free Syrian Army captain, Iyad al-Dik, was killed by the Russian airstrike already.
Wasn't that one of McCain's buddies?
Probably.
I think he's in the photo. I think he's in the photo with John McCain. No wonder McCain was looking so unhappy on the floor of the Congress today.
Yeah, so he's gone, and it's already been how long since the Russian airstrike's ready, and then all of a sudden the U.S. can't bomb them. They can't find out. I mean, come on, people. You know, this is ridiculous. You know, the U.S. don't want to bomb these people because they're using them as a proxy army. So people need to wake up and figure out what's going on.
Okay, well, absolutely right. And I've got more comments about exactly what Russia is doing a little further in, but I want to get some other details out of the way. So, Dustin, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, we're already getting videos of the airstrikes out. Russia is hitting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. China is in the region. They've got ships in the Mediterranean. So does Russia. Iran is in there, and basically they're saying to the U.S. and all of the U.S. co-conspirators, you might want to stand off to one side so that we don't have an unfortunate accident. And unfortunately, the U.S. is taking the attitude, no, this is our party. You are not welcome here. There's still no communication between the U.S. and the Russian military, no communication between the Israeli and the Russian military, which means sooner or later somebody's going to take a shot at the wrong airplane and World War III will be off and running for real. Okay, now Russia is sending in their latest and greatest weapons. They've deployed something like 5 more of their latest Su-34s. And this is an amazing aircraft, absolutely amazing aircraft. It makes the F-22 and the F-35 look like crippled ducks. And I'll tell you what Putin is going to do here. Putin is going to go on in there and he's going to stamp out ISIS in a matter of a week or less. And he's going to do it not only to remove the U.S. justification for being in Syria, or at least force them to go back to saying, yeah, this is all about us overthrowing another government and putting in a puppet ruler. But he's going to demonstrate to the world, especially to those people still believing the official story about why we're in Syria, He's going to show Russia can do what the U.S. could not. Get ISIS and Al-Qaeda and do it quickly and effectively. And it's going to send a message to the rest of the world how really effective the Russian military has become. And by the way, ever since Russia started moving against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, all of the NATO countries, they're out there saying, you know, we got to have meetings with Russia. We got to talk to Russia now. Russia's calling the shots, and Washington, D.C. is not at all happy about that. Now, Russia did notify the U.S. and Israel of the airstrikes and said, you might want to stay out of the way. We don't want to have any collisions. These are brand new Russian aircraft. We don't want the paint scratched. We don't want the chrome dinged. Just, you know, stay clear. We're going to do our job. And the U.S. is saying, no, we're not going to comply with the demand. They actually called the Russian notification unprofessional. How unprofessional of them to come in and dare to tell us that they're going into Syria. But you need to keep in mind the following important facts. The government of Syria has asked Russia to come help them against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The government of Syria has not asked the United States to come in under the excuse of fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda and bomb Syria to rubble. Intervention in another country leading to regime change is a violation of international law and the United Nations Charter. And as long as you remember these facts, you will know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are in this situation. And the hypocrisy coming out of the U.S. government is just absolutely stunning. Kerry, of course, is out there warning Lavrov that going in and bombing ISIS and Al-Qaeda will escalate the years-long conflict. No, it won't. It's going to be over in a week and a half. And that is going to really show up the U.S. in the eyes of those people who buy the official story that the U.S. was in there to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Because Russia's going to do in a week and a half what the U.S. failed to do for months and months and months on end. Now, Obama is out there saying, we're going to use all of our tools to fight ISIS. They've been doing that for months. They weren't able to do it. Now, you and I know the U.S. never intended to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They were arming ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They've been caught by their own propaganda. And the propaganda is starting to reach the stage of Twilight Zone or Fantasyland, depending upon your age group. The White House is out there issuing statements, Putin can't act alone. This from the country that has acted alone in regime change of Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Ukraine, Iran, Chile. And every one of those foreign interventions is a violation of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. Now, what's really interesting is when Obama was speaking to the United Nations General Assembly earlier this week, he actually made the statement that strong states should not impose their will on weaker ones. Really? Again, look at all the weaker states conquered and regime changed and drone struck by the United States. And for Obama to get up there and make that statement, this is your president on drugs. He's either taking way too many or nowhere near enough for him to make a statement like that. Does he actually believe anybody in the UN General Assembly is believing that nonsense? Or we, the American people, are believing that nonsense? And, of course, Israel's not coordinating with Russia and Syria. Israel is still gunning to go into the Golan Heights. One mistake, and everybody's going to be shooting at everybody. This is a very, very dangerous situation. This is the closest we've been to all-out world war since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show.
And don't you get booked by...
And the corporate media is still going on about how dare Russia come into Syria and so forth and so on. But you need to remember, Russia has a legal right to be there. They've been invited by the government of Syria to come in and help them deal with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The United States does not have an invitation from the government of Syria. The United States does not have a United Nations mandate to intervene in a country. The United States is in the wrong. They are the rogue state, the violator of international law and the UN Charter. And they're trying to come up with some kind of a propaganda device to get you, the American people, to somehow think the U.S. government are the good guys. But we all know otherwise. Now, Donald Trump has come on out with a thumbs up for Putin for getting into Syria, basically saying, yeah, let Russia take care of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now, I think I'm enjoying Trump's campaign. I'm going to support him because he's shaking things up. But once again, he's displaying a very dangerous naivete about what's really going on in Washington, D.C. He doesn't seem to really understand the real motives for all the U.S. interventions. By the way, again, going back to Obama's speech at the United Nations, he dared to chastise Russia and China for not abiding by the rules of international behavior. And he managed to keep a straight face while doing it. It's just amazing. But the reality is, again, all of these U.S. interventions violate international law. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a couple of phone calls here. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Michael, looking at all the information coming out of various nations and states around the world, Putin has really shaken things up. There's chaos in Washington, chaos in London, and it's most enjoyable.
Oh, he yanked the rug right out from under the war machine. He trapped the West in its own propaganda about ISIS and Al-Qaeda. He's now in a position to demonstrate to the world that Russia's military is far more effective, not to mention less expensive, than the American military. He played this brilliantly.
Well, I think one of the main events now is that, of course, Russia gives Hezbollah an air force. They've got air cover now to ship weapons over that border, which is now sealed to the attack theories. They've been cleared out.
Hezbollah's got their own tank brigade now. They've got tanks,
Yeah, they can take a convoy of them over into Lebanon and challenge the Israelis. So that must be grating on Mr. Netanyahu's backside.
Oh, yeah, because he wants the Golan, he wants a big piece of Syria as part of Eretz Israel, and all of a sudden he's dealing with the fact that that border may not be as easy to cross as he wanted it to be. And I'm sure that's going to be a big part of his speech to the United Nations tomorrow about how Iran is a threat. Last night they were screaming about, we cannot accept Iranians on Syria's border and we have a right to attack, which is kind of like saying Canada has a right to invade the United States because they don't like all the Mexicans getting near the Canadian border. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. By the way, we have a little poll running on WhatReallyHappened.com. What silly little cartoon will Netanyahu show to the United Nations tomorrow during his speech?
I wonder. But I mean, the whole foreign policy of NATO and the NATO nations, including the US, of course, has been thrown into chaos. And of course, this intervention in Syria by Russia at the invitation, I wonder if Donbass and Luhansk and Crimea invite Russia in to give them a hand with their problems. I mean, it's pointing, the politics of this West versus East.
That's a very difficult question you just posed here, and I don't think Russia is going to make the mistake of going in to the Eastern Ukrainian republics because they are not yet internationally recognized governments. Syria is. Bashar al-Assad won his last election with an 80% majority. I mean, show me any American politician who's ever had that kind of an election majority, and even with all the crooked elections we have in this country. But the actual status of nation-state for Lugansk and Donetsk is gray, and for that reason, I think Russia is going to hang back. And we're already seeing the EU is starting to back away from the idea of merging with Ukraine. Ukraine is saying, well, we're going to join with Europe whether Europe wants us or not, which is a very reckless statement for Poroshenko to make. And after signing all these agreements with NATO, NATO has now come into Kiev and said, you got to go along with the Minsk agreement. So that situation is already beginning to deteriorate.
Yeah, I mean, Germany now and France looking very shaky as NATO partnerships. The devastation to French farming and the German industrialists has been enormous with these sanctions on Russia, and it looks like that Germany is seriously considering moving away from NATO and actually joining with Russia and going back in there.
Yeah, so is France. So is France. France is, this anti-Russian coalition is falling apart. And that's why McCain was out on the floor of the Congress saying, it's not too late, it's not too late, we can get this going. They're purely reactive at this point. They've lost the initiative, to use the military term. And that means they've really lost the war. Now, it's still a dangerous situation because the U.S. government feels they have no choice but to move forward, because to quit now means the U.S. economy, which was dependent on everybody in the planet using the U.S. dollar, is going to collapse. And so I don't see the U.S. government backing down or admitting defeat yet. There's still a risk that this thing could go nuclear. Right now, the future of all mankind is in the hands of whichever world leader is the least mentally stable. And as Obama demonstrated during his UN speech, he's losing his grip on reality.
What I think is happening, yeah, I mean, but it's just chaos because of this swift move by Putin. He played a brilliant card. He hasn't put troops on the ground. It's just the threat. It seems to have shaken Washington to his core.
Well, Putin has gotten an absolutely unanimous vote from the Russian parliament for whatever military action he wants to do inside Ukraine. And I don't think Putin wants to put troops on the ground. He doesn't need to. All he needs to do is take out all those ISIS and Al-Qaeda command centers. Once those hired mercenaries realize they're actually being shot at, they're going to leave. They're going to bury those ISIS flags, take off those little hoodies, and they're just going to split to someplace else. It's going to fall apart week and a half, 2 weeks top.
Well, I'm looking at, you were saying the support. I mean,
okay, John, I hate to cut you off. We got to do a commercial break, and we'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go right to the phones here. Matthew in Texas. Matthew, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, there's a new documentary out about Aaron Schwartz. Have you seen it?
No. Just give us a quick rundown. What's it about?
Do you know who he is?
The name rings a bell, but, in the middle of all this stuff going on with Syria and Russia, it seems like we're going off on a tangent.
Into World War III, and I'm trying to avoid that conversation so we don't put it into people's consciousness. But Aaron Schwartz was the founder of Reddit. He was at Harvard, Cambridge, all these things. He's one of the smartest people I've ever seen. There's a new documentary, Internet's Own Boy, and I thought it was very good.
Well, I'll have to hunt it down and look at it. I'm obviously not equipped to comment on it right now, okay? But I will. What's the name of the documentary again?
Internet's Own Boy. And basically, he ended up getting killed off by the government, supposedly.
Well, I heard he died, and I heard there were rumors about it. But I'll tell you what. I'll take a look for the documentary, and then you can call back in on that one. Thank you very much for the phone call. Getting on back to Syria. Now, David Cameron is trying to regain the initiative on the agenda in Syria, which is really to replace the government. And Cameron is back out there again saying Syria's Bashar al-Assad must go. And, we want a Syria without ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but it has to be without Assad. Both need to go. Well, Dave, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle, here's your parachute. We ran out of the desert camo. Here's a bright day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers. Watch your head climbing into that transport aircraft, and we'll call Damascus and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. Now, David is out there blustering and bluffing and trying to keep the focus on Assad because he himself is in trouble. Because there is a legal proceeding initiated against David Cameron over his deployment of drones to Syria without proper authority from the British government. And they may hold him to account. There's a huge petition out there. In fact, there's two petitions, one for Tony Blair and one for David Cameron, to just crate them all up and ship them to The Hague for war crimes trials. Now, of course, in the midst of all this turmoil, every single military-industrial complex around the world is out there saying, see, we need more money. We have to be ready. We have to bring back the Cold War and just starve the people to build weapons there. And over in Great Britain, they're out there saying, you know, our tanks are hopelessly outclassed by the Russians. We've got to have a new fleet of battle tanks to take on Putin. We're not actually at war with Putin just yet. They obviously want one. And remember, the bankers who are above all of this, who loan the money for the weapons, who loan the money for the fight, who loan the money for reconstruction, they love this stuff. War is the bankers' richest harvest because they get sky-high interest rates on all of this stuff. And they don't care who wins or who loses because they make money off of both sides. Now then, looking at the money, following the money, there's an article that came out of Global Research, you know, going after the Islamic State, who is behind the Caliphate Project. And they're starting to look into, where is all this Muslim bashing, this hate mongering come from? Where's the money behind people like Pamela Geller? And they're basically saying we need to start out with the fact ISIS is a creation of U.S. intelligence agencies. Remember, the top ISIS commander in Syria, if he's still alive, it's been documented. He was trained by the United States, in the United States, been working for the U.S., was still being funded and armed as late as 2013. That's the big stink behind what happened at the consulate in Benghazi, Libya. They were taking weapons that had been sent to Libya to get Gaddafi and shipping them to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And we need to start following that money trail, that supply trail, to find out what's really going on. Now, Petraeus is back out. You know, he's been hiding from public life ever since he was slapped down for revealing classified material to his mistress. And he's back out there, and he's a born-again neocon, and he's out there saying, we've got to get Assad, we've got to get Putin, we've got to go on out and do all this stuff. And again, Petraeus, here's your rifle. And I think we really do need to start holding all these people who think war is a great idea and say, fine, lead by example. You go first. And as a matter of fact, for the convenience of our readers and listeners, I posted to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com the PDF of the official enlistment form for the United States Armed Services, and I encourage everybody to download this, print out a bunch of copies, and just have them with you, so that when you're going around and all these undercover informants who are in schools and businesses and all the rest of that are standing up there saying, we need to go to war in Syria and Russia, just hand them the enlistment form and say, here, if you feel that strongly about it. That usually will shut them up. They're splendidly brave with other people's lives. Now, Saudi Arabia is threatening to come in to Syria to get Bashar al-Assad. So this is turning into a regional war. The entire Middle East is going to be on fire. And Israel's saying, we can get Eretz Israel. We can just get everybody, ship them out as refugees. We're going to take it all. The Americans will fight and die for it, but Israel will get the benefit. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of people were wondering just how it was that Saudi Arabia wound up as chair of the United Nations Human Rights Council. And WikiLeaks has released some cables saying that Great Britain lobbied for this. Great Britain put a lot of pressure saying we need Riyadh to be in charge of the Human Rights Council. Not exactly sure why. And again, to be fair and honest, and a great believer in national and cultural sovereignty, what happens in Saudi Arabia is the business of the Saudi Arabian people. And a lot of people are looking at what goes on in Saudi Arabia, and they find it very shocking and offensive. But to be fair, a lot that goes on here in the United States of America is equally shocking and offensive to the people of Saudi Arabia. But you do have to admit their method of dealing with drug crime is effective, albeit brutal. Now, Paul Craig Roberts is out with another article about how Obama deifies American hegemony. And the language that the U.S. government uses, where when other leaders are oppressing their people, it's oppression. And when the U.S. goes in and bombs the country and lowers the standard of living even further for the ordinary people, well, that's liberation. That's humanitarian action. And you need to learn to see through the lies and the spin. You really do. Now, looking at the United Nations General Assembly, which is going on, the Palestinian Authority president, Abbas, is expected to say that the Palestinian Authority is not bound by their current agreements with Israel for the very simple reason that Israel has not complied with their side of the deal, which is standard operating procedure for Israel. Of course, what Israel will say is Abbas has abandoned the agreement, therefore the war is on, because that too is typical behavior for Israel. Remember, Israel's membership at the United Nations had two conditions placed on it: a Palestinian right of return and compensation to those Palestinians who chose of their own free will not to return. Israel never complied with either of those conditions, and I think the world would be much better off if Israel were kicked out of the United Nations. Okay, moving on here. Abbas to tell UN if stalemate continues, we will cease honoring our past agreements, basically a rehash of what I just said. And, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, when he talks tomorrow and shows this cute little cartoon of whatever, is expected to blame Palestine for the Jerusalem violence, even though it was started by settlers invading and desecrating the Al-Aqsa Mosque under the protection of the IDF. But, of course, it's all the Palestinians' fault. They made us do it, Mommy. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And, let's see, I need to get that pop. There we are. Okay, now then, I put up a little poll at WhatReallyHappened.com, and it's all in good fun. It's humor. It's not serious. What silly cartoon will Netanyahu show the United Nations General Assembly tomorrow? And as of the last time I checked, a cartoon of a bomb got 12 votes. Nuclear duck got 21 votes. Cartoon of his mother-in-law got 21 votes. Wile E. Coyote got 18 votes. A little bit of a late starter out the gate there. Cartoon of a bagel, 19 votes. And more forged Iranian nuclear documents got 62 votes. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Wally in Texas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, sir. What I read out of this, and it's like you say, it's very serious. This is the perfect time to complain about Russia being overly aggressive, Putin being overly aggressive. They can build that up and then, boom, a false flag if they get somebody to believe it. That's taking less of a gamble than nuking a place, and I wouldn't put it past them to try to do something like that. So it's very serious times right now. That's the way I feel about it. But I don't think they got the guts to nuke it. I think they're going to pull a false flag. It's the perfect time for them.
I tend to agree with you because the last couple of days we've been seeing all these promises that ISIS is getting ready for a nuclear holocaust in the West. ISIS is going to use a nuclear bomb to trigger a tsunami. And we know that every time either the United States or Israel gets into a corner where they cannot propagandize the American people, they're going to pull off some kind of a giant stunt to try and motivate us toward the war. They did that with the Lusitania. They did that with Pearl Harbor. They did that with the World Trade Towers, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, sinking of the USS Maine. How many more times do we have to be lied to before we realize this is how these things get done? And, of course, from Israel's point of view, they're desperate to prove that Iran had a nuclear bomb and is a threat. And setting off a nuclear bomb somewhere in the U.S., would certainly allow Israel to say, see, we told you so. But there are two issues you need to remember when we're talking about a nuclear false flag. First of all, some years ago, there was this very strange situation where a bomber took off inside the United States of America with 6 nuclear bombs on the wing pylons. Not stored, transported inside the plane, but actually mounted on the wing pylons, was going either to or from Minot Air Base. I'm reaching back into the dim mist of time here. And when it finally arrived where it was supposed to be, there was this big confusion, cover-up. Apparently only 5 of the nuclear weapons were accounted for. Now that's one factor. The other factor is it's now admitted by the United States government that Israel got their first generation of weapons grade uranium from inside the United States of America from a company called Numex, which was diverting nuclear materials to Israel. And all Israel would have to do is not smuggle all of it back to Israel. Leave enough in the United States to make a bomb or two. And once you have that fissionable uranium, making a nuclear bomb is easy. It's simple. It's just a big pipe with 2 masses of uranium at each end below the critical mass. You slap them together, it goes bang. That's the secret of the uranium little boy style bomb. Now, when the Nuclear Emergency Search Team was first put together, they started surveying the United States of America to map known sources of radiation as a baseline map, so that if there was a nuclear emergency and they're searching for something, they wouldn't be led astray by sources that were legitimately there, like isotopes in universities and so forth. They found that the consulate, the Israeli consulate in New York, has some kind of a radiation source inside. And of course, Israel will not allow an inspection because the consulate is Israeli sovereign territory, and the U.S. is not allowed to basically go on in there and take a look. But it would have been very trivial once Israel had bomb-quality, weapons-grade uranium to just leave it in the United States and build a couple of bombs around it and have them planted someplace as a blackmail tool against the U.S. government, or eventually to use for whatever other purposes. So a false flag is definitely a possibility. We know false flags are a reality throughout history, and yeah, we have a right to be concerned that as the U.S. government begins to realize firmly, finally, that the American people do not support this imperial aggression agenda, they may try something really, really dramatic. And it's going to have to be a lot bigger than airplanes crashing into skyscrapers, because that's passé now. Been there, done that, didn't buy the T-shirt.
Yep. And I agree, and completely. There's only one thing that will hold them at bay that I can see, is that they know who they're dealing with. Putin has waltzed them clean across Texas, outguessed them on every move, and they know they're dealing with him. Master chess player.
Yeah, Putin played this brilliantly. He trapped the United States with their own propaganda. The U.S. is trying to figure out some way they can get away from saying that they were in Syria to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda and sort of get back to saying, yeah, we're really there to get out Assad in a way that the American people will go along with. But I think the American people, by and large, have had a belly full of all this duplicity coming out of Washington, D.C., and I've noticed the online shills are transitioning away from name-calling, anybody who's talking about this stuff, to simply trying to pretend that they're ordinary Americans who believe the government. Oh, yes, I believe Syria's bad. Assad's an evil dictator, and yes, we're justified in intervening. And they're trying to create the illusion of popular support for the government agenda, and they're falling flat on their face.
I think that it'd be a great move on Putin's part if this escalates very much more, to start just blowing up their refuge hideouts that all these very rich people have. Just start blowing them up so they got no place to run to. How about that?
It's a nice fantasy. Personally, I think, when the money junkies all go down into their little prepper bunkers, we ought to just cement over the hatches and be done with it. Putin is not going to waste military resources on targets that are not a direct threat to him. If this thing spins out of control, it'll be strikes on military bases, military assets, and unfortunately the civilians living around them, me included, will just get caught in the fray, as it were.
All I'm saying, Mike, is that Putin will mix the concrete.
Yeah. Well, I'll help import. What can I tell you?
Have a great one.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, Israel is uncorking once again on the people of Gaza. Ooh, somebody fired a bottle rocket out of Gaza into Israel, aimed at a piece of desert dust. Same thing they always do. And so Israel's conducting airstrikes into Gaza, and they're probably going to intensify while the world's attention is on Syria. Because that's when Israel likes to go in and commit war crimes against Gaza, when the world is looking elsewhere, at elections, at the Pope, at whatever. Now, interestingly enough, Israel is preparing a ground invasion of Syria on the side of ISIS and Al-Qaeda against Bashar al-Assad. And they have been planning this since, they announced they were calling up the reservist troops back in August. So this isn't just something that's happened out of thin air. They've been preparing for this. And yes, we should expect some kind of a false flag to make it look like Iran is attacking Israel from Syria, at which point you can all kiss your sons and daughters goodbye, because they're, as usual, going to be sent in to fight Israel's wars for them, because those Israeli children are really too precious to risk in these kind of things. That's what the Americans are for here. Okay, now up in Afghanistan, as you know, the Taliban is resurgent. They've recaptured Kunduz. They've apparently captured a large contingent of artillery, tanks, and they're freeing prisoners and raising their flag. And the U.S. is now saying, we're going to have to go back into Afghanistan because those gosh darn conquered Afghani people refuse to stay conquered. Which, if you were a student of history, you would understand is an historical truth. Because the last military commander to successfully conquer Afghanistan and hang on to it was Alexander the Great. And he only kept it for 3 years. Afghanistan is rightly called the graveyard of empires. Britain got handed their hats there, the Soviet Union did, and now it's the turn of the United States of America. So, we're coming up here on our top of the hour news and commercial break, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and the phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Now, as I mentioned earlier to that caller, we're starting to see a decline in, shall we say, the enthusiasm in the European Union to merge with Ukraine. Because back before the U.S. coup d'etat that drove Yanukovych from power, Ukraine looked like a good deal. Lots of manufacturing, lots of agriculture, lots of revenue generation. And here we are almost 2 years later, and the industrial base has been bombed into rubble. It is hideously in debt. And it looks like a losing proposition, and all of a sudden the European Union is saying, maybe we don't want to take this one on after all. But we did deny it to Russia, and that's worth something. And Poroshenko is out there saying, we're going to merge with the EU whether you want us or not, which telegraphs not only his arrogance, but his ignorance of the process of joining the European Union. Now, as you know, last Sunday, Catalonia had elections, and apparently, the pro-independence people did very, very well. They didn't achieve a solid majority, but they got enough seats where it is viewed as a victory for the independence power. And apparently, the head of the regional government in Catalonia has now been indicted by Spain's government for unconstitutionally calling a referendum on independence from Spain last year. So all the imperialists are throwing tantrums, all the New World Orderists of a one-world government. We can't have these people going off and running their own countries. What do you think this is, a democracy? Now, over in China, something is going on. As you know, their economy is dealing with the loss of its major export markets, meaning the United States and Europe. And apparently, there have been 13 parcel bombs sent in different locations exploding. 7 people have been killed. And nobody knows what this is all about just yet. The government is actually telling people, be very careful about opening parcels. So let's talk a little bit about the economy. As you probably heard on the news break, the U.S. stock market had a really good day. The Asian markets opened last night just with a surge. The interventionists were out there shoving it up. But despite today's stock market rally, this still turned out to be the worst quarter since 2011. We're not in an economic recovery. We absolutely are not. Now, since President Obama took office, the national debt, what they admit to, has gone from 10 trillion to 19 trillion. It has almost doubled since Obama went into office. It's the largest single administration increase in the national debt in the history of the United States. Now, as I say, this is the debt they're admitting to, because these numbers don't include unfunded mandates and various other programs. And the reality is we don't know what the number really is, because the Treasury website has had the debt frozen at $18,112,975,000,000 for 199 days. Now, nobody is going to believe that the government stopped borrowing and spending almost 200 days ago. That's just not realistic. They just don't want to tell you how out of control the borrowing has become. And as you know, they're having a big debate in Congress right now about an emergency funding measure to keep the government going through December, because they can't agree on a new budget. Now, getting into politics here and economics, there's a new scandal coming out regarding General Electric, because apparently a General Electric employee convinced a Wisconsin legislator to basically lie about the reasons for a General Electric plant closing there in Wisconsin, and told him it's because federal subsidies were cut off. It's all the fault of the government. We have to close the factory. And apparently, that was not it. And now they're saying, yeah, it was a complete lie, which is just another reminder. Politicians are paid to lie to you. Now, there's an article over in politicaloutcast.com. Central bankers have a special new excrement sandwich, and you are going to love it. And they're basically talking about the fact that they are getting ready to bring to the United States what they've already done in places like Cyprus and Greece. The central bankers are now planning to directly confiscate money from depositors, and we can count on the U.S. corporate media to report this as a bold innovation that will help the economy. It's not going to help the economy. It's going to make our economy worse. It's going to help the bankers and the money junkies feed their addiction, so they have larger piles of that ink and paper stuff and gold coins piled up in their living room that they can roll around on naked and have orgasms. But the economy is not improving. Retail sales in the United States right now are at their worst levels since 2009. We have retailers closing their doors ahead of the Christmas shopping season, which is normally the time of year when they earn the most revenue. Most retail corporations literally depend on the holiday shopping season to keep them in the black year after year after year. And we have had miserable holiday shopping seasons because we, the American people, don't have any more money. It's all in the pockets of the money junkies, and there aren't enough of them to run around and buy all the products to keep the consumer economy going. And that is just the reality. But these money junkies are in the throes of their addiction, and like any other addict, they cannot see the damage their addiction causes to those around them. And we need to recognize that the lust for money, for the sake of having money, is a mental illness. It's an addiction. Remember that documentary, I'm blanking on the name, in Inside Trade, Inside Deal, the one that won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. It was about the mortgage-backed security fraud, the collapse of the Icelandic banks. Inside Job, that was it. And they had an interesting observation in there that scientists had gone into some of these Wall Street firms and wired up the brains of traders on these brain scanning machines, and they found out the part of the brain that activated when they scored a really good deal economically was the exact same part of the brain that lights up when you do cocaine. Pleasure center. And by the way, this documentary also mentioned cocaine abuse is rampant on Wall Street. So, right now, Americans are raiding their retirement funds just to survive. And of course, when you have an IRA or a 401k and you have to take money out of it, there's a huge tax penalty. We've been hearing all this talk about how the government may force you to liquidate your 401ks and IRAs and put the money into a specially issued treasury bond. They may have waited too long. There's not that much left out there in the retirement funds. Meanwhile, we're seeing reports that premiums on junk silver are now at very high levels. Now, if you don't know what I mean, junk silver refers to pre-1965 U.S. coinage that actually had silver in it. And it's called junk because these are coins that have no numismatic collectible value. They're the wrong dates, they're worn down too much, they're not in good condition, and they're basically sold as a silver investment. And apparently they're becoming so scarce, there's a premium level on that now as well. By the way, if you lived in Sweden, you would be working a 6-hour work day. And I think for most Americans, the 8-hour workday is a fond memory because 10 and 12 has become the norm. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. And it's time to talk about Hillary Clinton's email server. And the State Department is releasing another 6,000 pages of Hillary Clinton emails, all of which we may presume are scrubbed of anything remotely incriminating. And there's a very interesting video that's out there. It was being reported over at townhall.com where a Hillary spokeswoman is being asked about the email scandal and just rambles on without really saying much of anything. But it does make the point that when Hillary Clinton was asked about it on Meet the Press, her campaign ads and political action groups published tweets that were word for word identical. Now, the new talking point coming out of the Hillary campaign and all of the PACs supporting her is the email scandal is a dead issue. It's yesterday. It's going to go away. Well, first of all, it is against federal campaign laws for a candidate's campaign to coordinate with political action committees supporting the candidacy. They're supposed to be operating independently. That's why the PACs get to have the special exemptions for limits on funding. And this email issue is not dead until somebody deals with the possibility that Hillary was selling secrets for donations. Now, there's a very interesting article that came out from the weeklystandard.com, and they're reporting on an investigation carried out by ProPublica and Gawker that identified Hillary Clinton was running her own private, off-the-books spy network while Secretary of State. The people working for her were paid through other means. They were not officially State Department employees. This was apparently channeled through longtime Clinton aide Sidney Blumenthal. And they were funneling intelligence back and forth outside government control and monitoring. And now they're finding out that Tyler Drumheller was working directly with Blumenthal as a member of this spy network at the same time he worked as a consultant to CBS News and 60 Minutes. So now it is confirmed Hillary did have her own private spy network. Who was she spying for is the big question, and it must be answered. And we're not going to get an answer from the U.S. government here, because I'm looking at an article from RageandWar.com where FBI Director James Comey is briefing select lawmakers that the FBI is working 24/7 looking for a breach of Hillary Clinton's server, and so far we have found no evidence of any kind of a security lapse or breach. And that's exactly what I expected the FBI to say, because we know the FBI has a long record of protecting the Clintons, all the way back to the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, which was the event which triggered my involuntary transition from motion picture special effects to the truth movement. And so, yeah, the FBI is going to stand up there and say, absolutely, Hillary did nothing wrong. We have found no evidence whatsoever. By the way, little historical footnote. Did you know that the FBI was handed the complete plan for the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in August of 1941? It was handed to them by a British secret agent, Dusko Popov, who operated under the code name Tricycle. And the FBI looked at it and said, it's got to be a hoax. Couldn't possibly be real. And they tossed it. Great moments in the history of the FBI. You don't see those little embarrassments in all the TV shows and movies that make the FBI look like they're wonderful people. Nobody's made a movie about how the FBI set up the day the hippies took over Disneyland. Nobody's done a movie about the Black Panther coloring book. various other dirty tricks. All right, we're going to grab ourselves another phone call here. Dave in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I've been listening to you since you were on Coast, and you've opened my eyes to quite a few things. I'm still kind of adjusting to thinking negatively about the Israeli government, but man, you really give me some good things to think about, and I'm coming closer.
Oh, that's good here, because nothing bothers the government more than people who are thinking for themselves.
Well, that's true, and you definitely have to do that nowadays. My sort of pet subject is one that you were just talking about before the last break, and that is the bankers and their money addiction. And I also remember you saying you were going to write a book and talk about what would be a good system when the current one collapses.
Yeah, the blueprint for the new America, it's still in progress. I'm trying to finish it in my copious amounts of free time. But yeah, I am working on getting that done.
I was going to see if you've ever looked into one. There was a guy named Kelso back in the 70s and 80s, and he came up with something. It's kind of like employee ownership, but it involves sort of like citizen ownership of the Fed. I think the main name that they use for it now is capital homesteading. And, basically like the idea is, to take the place of Social Security, people would have like a retirement account where, sort of like money creation would flow through it, but only for productive growth. And so they would end up being like shareholders of companies. Mm-hmm. Instead of the bankers profiting from all the money creation and their crazy game.
Well, we can discard all the colorful names and euphemisms and distill it down to a very simple idea, which is that the public currency ought to be the property of the public, and it should be a public utility. And when the public currency is the property of private bankers, you get debt slavery and oppression and hardship and eventual war. You cannot have a private central bank without eventually having major wars of conquest trying to pay that unpayable debt.
I agree. But yeah, check that out when you're writing your book, and you might get some ideas, because, some people have already thought of a lot of these things, and I kind of did some research, and that's the one that looks the best to me.
Again, it's an idea that a lot of people have talked about under different names, which is a state central bank, a government-issued currency. A public currency is a public utility. We need to get back to that. It's the system the United States started with, and it works very well for the people in the country. Every nation that has started with that model or adopted that model do very well until all the nations that are still slaves to private central banks declare war on them, which is a big part of what happened in Libya.
Well, I agree with you, except that I will say that we don't want the government itself creating the money, because then you get these all-powerful politicians who end up just being kind of like the bankers are now,
Well, you need to understand, when the United States was started with a government-issued public currency, the government was intentionally weakened to prevent that. And so, along with no more private central banking, we need to get back to the issue of power and authority spread across the entire country to all levels of government and checks and balances. We've lost all of that. We've lost all the blessings that the Founding Fathers created this nation with. And we are currently descending into outright fascist economic dictatorship. Anyway, Dave, I need to let you go. We're coming up here on a commercial break. Thank you very much for the phone call.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently John Kerry and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov have been in an intense meeting at the United Nations, and they're getting ready to have a press conference. And it will be interesting to see the look on their respective faces, which will tell us a lot more about what was going on than whatever platitudes they may offer us. So we'll keep an eye on that. Now then, as I mentioned earlier, more of the Clinton emails are being released by the State Department to the Congress. Now, you're probably saying, why don't they just turn them all over? And the State Department is saying, well, we have to process them by hand. They were delivered to us on paper by Hillary, not electronic, which was done to prevent electronic searching. And they're going through and they're spotting classified information and having to do the redactions. And apparently this latest batch, fully 5% of the emails contain classified information. And that's an uptick from the earlier releases. Now, Hillary, at one point, was trying to come up with this story that, well, it wasn't classified when I received it. That, too, is another lie. Much of this information, especially the top secret, the no foreign, the special compartmentalized intelligence, anything from the satellite data is classified at the moment of creation. And by the way, if those classification marks are not on those emails, somebody somewhere is guilty of a felony. Because if you get a U.S. government classified email, you are not allowed to strip off the classification markings. I mean, it really is a mess. And Hillary's campaign, all they can do is say, you know, it's yesterday's news. It's a dead issue. We're moving on. We're going to talk about abortion and prescription medicine and get our message out. By the way, apparently one of the emails that surfaced in this latest dump is Hillary Clinton asking one of her staffers to remind her how many times she voted against raising the debt ceiling. So, apparently Hillary's memory is not what it used to be. Or maybe she's just setting the precedent for saying, I have no recollection for anything that happened. Anyway. Now, Hillary has suffered a very embarrassing defeat because the Teamsters Union, which is a coveted political endorsement for any candidate, voted unanimously. Their board of directors, 26-0, not to endorse Hillary Clinton. And they even went further and said they're waiting to talk to Donald Trump. That is a major, major campaign upset. And I can imagine the ashtrays are flying around campaign headquarters. Hillary was legendary for that in the White House, picking up ashtrays and hurling them at people she was angry with. Now, as you know, the head of Planned Parenthood is before Congress testifying on why government funding should continue for this operation. Planned Parenthood supporters are trying to skew the issue away from the methods of abortion and what was being done with the aborted babies back to it's a woman's right to have an abortion, you male chauvinist, patriarchal, whatever. I get a lot of emails like that. You know, and just to clarify the record, okay, I understand there are circumstances under which abortion is necessary and should be allowed. I do have a problem with all these women who want to, you know, have dating lives and they don't do birth control because they don't want to admit to themselves they're that kind of woman. And then, of course, nature takes its course and they get pregnant and they use abortion as retroactive birth control. I have a problem with that. I really do. But I have a real problem with what Planned Parenthood was doing with the fetuses. And I have a problem with this arbitrary declaration that these are not human beings until the moment of birth and they can't possibly feel pain. Nobody can really know that for sure. But apparently, the head of Planned Parenthood in her testimony before Congress came out and said, you know, this brouhaha over health care for women is blown out of proportion. And she was talking about the fact that Planned Parenthood supposedly does not actually provide any health services for women other than abortions themselves. It's an abortion factory. Go on in, get an abortion, cut up the kids, sell it. That's it. That's how they're making their money. And she said, you know, we don't actually provide any of the health services. We've never claimed to do so. And, of course, almost immediately, a video surfaced from her past where she said, yes, we're providing health services. We provide mammograms. We're doing where our concern and care is for the women. So she's caught in a blatant lie here. Now, one of Planned Parenthood's defense against these videos that have been surfacing one after the other is they're faked, they're edited, it's special effects, and apparently the Center for Medical Progress got Coalfire Systems. This is a cybersecurity and forensic analysis company to look at the videos put out by the Center for Medical Progress. Actually, it was Alliance Defending Freedom that awarded the contract. And the Coalfire Forensic Analysis said, there's no fakery here. And I looked at the videos, and I didn't see any fakery, but I figured because I worked in visual effects and the pro-abortion, pro-Planned Parenthood, which is, you're lying, you're covering up, there was no plane at the Pentagon, the Apollo moon landings are fake, you're a government plant, and you're, so forth and so on. All right, let's see. I thought we had a phone call, and it just went away. But so now we have a professional forensic company that has looked at these videos and said there's no fakery. These people at Planned Parenthood said what they appear to say on the video, and that's just the end of it right there. And again, we need to keep the focus on what Planned Parenthood was doing with these babies, because they altered the method of abortion to maximize the harvest, and that's a violation of federal law. And that's got nothing to do with the woman's right to choose or have an abortion on demand. And by the way, one more point why I dig my heels in on this issue, and that is this idea that husbands have nothing to say if their wives arbitrarily decide to have an abortion. That's a big sticking point for me. And until husbands and fathers' rights are brought into the equation, we're never going to see eye to eye on this. Now then, there was a very interesting article over at Investment Watch blog, was linked to another site here, to an article by well-known Muslim basher, hater, Pamela Geller. And she's upset over the fact that Ahmed Mohammed got to go to New York City and meet Mayor de Blasio. And they're furious. Their campaign to sell hatred of Muslims is in serious, serious trouble. And in this article, she's out there quoting about how Ahmed Mohammed intended to build a hoax bomb. He wanted to commit an act of terror. He was going to scare people with this fake bomb. And how dare we, honor him and treat him like he's some kind of a victim. And again, what Ahmed Mohammed built was a digital clock. And it doesn't look like a bomb. To anybody who knows anything at all about electronics, for one thing, there's no explosives, fake or otherwise. There's nothing that looks like sticks of TNT or dynamite, no blocks of plastic explosives. And I am sick and tired of Pamela Geller's constant bovine excrement. And it just enrages me how the corporate media just worships every word that she says. Now, there's another little bit of deception going on out there, and it has to do with Brett McGurk, who's going around the media talking about how he's an ambassador and he's pushing the anti-Islamic State agenda. But, he had a temporary appointment as an ambassador only, and it expired earlier this year. He's not allowed to keep on using the title. But the corporate media always addresses him as Ambassador McGurk. He's the expert. You should listen to him. We have to take a break for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line from Canada, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go right to the telephones here. Francis in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
Doing good.
And I just wanted to compliment you on your show. I'm a 9/11 truther since 2003, and I used to be a big Alex Jones fan, and I still really like Tex Mars, and Max Kaiser and all those guys, right? It's all good stuff. But your show, I got a bachelor's degree in history, and you got the best, for intense, concentrated information. You're right on top of everything.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words.
Yeah, well, you're doing a great service, because I was just listening to, I've just turned two of my friends onto your show, and they're really enthusiastic about you too, and just listening to you now talking about Hillary Clinton and the Teamsters. This TPP and the TTIP thing, it's a stealth missile coming at all of us, and nobody knows about it. The ignorance even of political leaders about this, especially here in Canada, there's a big campaign going on, and nobody wants to talk about it. Even the extreme lefties who should be defending us, they're just hiding from it, And so I just want to thank you for helping to spread the word and maybe take one small step towards our universal liberation from these, cocaine-addicted psychopaths on Wall Street and the City of London.
Well, I certainly want to go on doing that for as long as I possibly can here. But these days, I'm starting to see the system is starting to tear itself apart. And that is the best of all possible outcomes, because I really do see the U.S. government going the way of the former Soviet Union, just collapsing from internal rot, debt, decay, corruption, and public awareness of just how out of touch the government is with the people's needs and how little they care. And I'm beginning to see the process accelerate. So I think once it starts to come down one place, because of globalism, all these private central banks are going to take a major, major hit. And if there's one message that we can get out to the people of planet Earth as we move into the future, it's never, ever allow private central banks control of the public currency, because inevitably nothing but bad things come out of that. It's a 300-year-old scam they've been running. 300 years is enough. Let them take their unearned wealth and go off and live happy retirements, and let the rest of us get back to doing what's best for planet Earth and humanity and our families.
Yep.
Okay?
Great. I got one question for you.
Sure.
I just feel like I was noticing you're a CG guy, right?
Yes, I am.
And like what programs? Because I'm studying CG. I'm into Houdini and Mudbox and ZBrush and all that stuff, and Maya. And I just was wondering if you could just talk briefly about what programs you're into and what kind of work you've been doing.
You just named the list. I mean, Maya's the top there. I knew the people who developed Houdini. I actually went up to Toronto a couple of times to spend time with them learning about that system. But those are them right there. For people who are trying to learn computer animation, who don't have a huge budget, there's a lot of free stuff out there like Blender that you can start playing with and just learn the principles either for film and TV production or game development. I mean, games make more money than movies these days.
Yep.
Okay?
Bigger budgets. Thanks a lot. And keep up the good work.
As long as I possibly can. Thank you for the kind words. We're going to let you go here. Now, over the break, I got a comment in about Ahmed Mohammed saying that just because his little digital clock didn't have something that looked like sticks of dynamite or blocks of plastic explosives is no reason to think it could, that it might not be a bomb. There could be something new and inventive, something so small it couldn't be seen, but he's a Muslim after all. Well, if you're going to go down into that fantasy land of hidden, invisible explosives, meaning suggesting a device could be a bomb and should be treated that way, well, that would apply to my digital watch. It would apply to my little pocket calculator. It could apply to the TV remote. So you can see how ridiculous this whole thing has become. But Pamela Geller and her minions are out there. They have spent huge amounts of money selling the idea that we should hate and fear the Muslims, and they have just fallen flat on their face, and they don't know how to recover from it. All right, moving on here to the immigration naturalization issue, which is still of concern. And Trump is still right. This is not good for the United States or the economy. But apparently out in California, they have now issued more than 500,000 driver's licenses to illegal immigrants in California. And what's really weird is Armando Botello, who's a spokesman for the Department of Motor Vehicles, said they've reached a milestone. And it means the DMV work is paying off, that we're able to get all these driver's licenses out as quickly as we did, and all drivers will be safer now. Well, actually, no. Because if you are rushing the program just to get the licenses into the hands of the illegal immigrants, it means more unsafe drivers are slipping through the driving tests to get those licenses. So in reality, this rush to just get driver's licenses into the hands of the illegal immigrants means traffic is going to be less safe. And let's talk about common sense. The traffic infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the freeways have not been expanded to deal with the larger population. So crowding another 500,000 drivers onto an already crowded road system is also going to decrease safety. Now, as you know, police brutality has become a major issue in the United States. We have all these Israeli-trained police departments who are they're killing more Americans than the terrorists are. They're killing more Americans than ISIS is. And, of course, the official response by the government is, well, you should just accept that. It's the price for living in a society full of law and order. And apparently the FBI has sort of backed away from looking for the numbers of how many Americans are being wrongfully killed by the police. They feel that you don't really need to know that number. By the way, there was an interesting story about a guy and his wife. She was pregnant, about to deliver. The water had broke. He's trying to get her to the hospital. Cops pull him over. And he says, my wife is giving birth. I need to get to the hospital. Now, in ages past, the cop would have said, follow me, and led them there with the lights and siren going. But no, this cop arrested the husband, put him on the ground. I mean, the woman's going into labor. They won't even let her out of the car. That's how out of control it is here. Now, we've mentioned over the last couple of weeks, more than that actually, Israel is mounting a major campaign to destroy freedom of speech in this country. They're using the excuse, oh, it's racist, it's offensive, it's anti-Semitic, and all of a sudden Israel is realizing that every time they go out and attack a critic of the government of Israel, it makes the government of Israel look worse than they already are. And, of course, there was that big issue where Stephen Saleta was fired from the University of Illinois over comments he made in his personal social media. Not in the classroom, not on campus, in his personal life. Now, Stephen has sued the university, as he justly should. Now, the judge, Harry Leinenweber, is saying that he has been given evidence by Saleta's lawyers that the university is trying to destroy all the communications that led to Stephen's firing, meaning the letters coming from these various Jewish lobbying groups, Israeli lobbying groups, saying, you get rid of this guy. We will not tolerate anybody who criticizes the government of Israel. And now they're destroying evidence. And I guess the University of Illinois' attitude is, well, we don't have to obey the laws of the United States because we serve Israel, and Israel's above the law. And anything we do to serve Israel is good. And if we have to break the law, well, that's just what we have to do here. All right, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here from Damien in California. We've only got about 30 seconds. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'll make it brief. This is Damien. I'm usually in New York, but I'm out visiting family in California. Two things really quick. About the licenses and illegal immigrants, another point that's overlooked is that very rarely do many of these people get any insurance whatsoever. So often they're in accidents and there's no insurance coverage whatsoever, and there's a huge amount of issues in that, and they don't generally do anything legally as far as prosecute them.
I thought you couldn't get a driver's license in California unless you had proof of insurance. Or I guess they give you the license and the proof of insurance is only when you get pulled. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. It really is. Damien, got to let you go. Got to take a break for our top of the hour news and commercials, and we will be back with hour number 3 in just a few minutes. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. During the news break, Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry came out to have their little press conference, and as I predicted, the body language tells you all you really need to know about what's going on. You don't need to listen to the platitudes. In fact, anytime you're looking at any politician on TV, it's a very good exercise to just turn the sound down all the way, turn it off, and just watch their face and their body language. And that will tell you more about what's going on than the words. And even the Fox News commentator, I couldn't believe he said this, made a comment to the effect that Kerry is trying to save face because, after all, Botox isn't cheap. And I didn't catch the name of the commentator, but I have a feeling he may not be there for very, very much longer. Ashton Carter immediately followed up, repeating the mantra that Russia's behaving very unprofessionally in Syria, and they should be shamed for it. The fact of the matter is the U.S. has now lost control of the narrative. In Syria, Russia is calling the shots there. And say they're unprofessional. And the latest spin coming out of Washington is that Russia is targeting the moderate rebels, the ones who are on our side against Assad. Well, from the point of view of Assad, who has asked Russia to come in and help them, everybody fighting against him is the enemy. And the U.S. is trying to basically pull away from ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the trap that they walked into with their own propaganda by saying, well, you know, Russia's bombing the legitimate opposition. They're thrashing around. They're absolutely thrashing around right now. And everybody sees it happening. Now then, before the break, we were talking about Israel's attempts to end freedom of speech in the United States of America. And their primary target right now are U.S. college campuses, in the hope that if they can brainwash college students to never criticize Israel, that the next coming generation political scene, that everybody will go back to forgetting about how AIPAC and Netanyahu are controlling our Congress, which was fully on display during the P5+1 negotiations. But there's an interesting article coming out of Electronic Intifada. Are pro-Israel bullies on U.S. campuses planning dirtier tricks? And it's basically saying these pro-Israel lobby groups going into these U.S. college campuses are being heavily funded, huge amounts of money. And they're talking specifically about a meeting at the University of California Regents on this measure to ban criticism of Israel as racist, anti-Semitic, and offensive. Richard Blum basically threatened to have his wife, U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein, publicly criticize the university if it didn't block criticism of Israel's government. And that criticism from a U.S. senator would put the entire university system under federal scrutiny. So they're literally using extortion tactics to try and get the regents to go along with this. Remember what Voltaire said. To find out who really rules over you, just look for the person you are not allowed to criticize. We're free to criticize Obama, Kerry, Biden, certainly Hillary Clinton. But they're trying to put out the message, you cannot criticize Israel. Now, over in Europe, Dutch politician Geert Wilders has been a major fixture in the Muslim bashing going on in Europe. And basically, it's the Islamophobia industry, and everybody's making huge amounts of money who's willing to go along with it. And this Geert Wilders is looking at potential charges of inciting hatred and violence against Dutch citizens of Moroccan descent because of what he's been doing. Due to a recent change in Dutch law, Geert Wilders has been forced to reveal the sources of his funding for all of this Muslim bashing, and it turns out much of it is coming from the United States of America. In particular, a group called the David Horowitz Foundation. So all this Muslim hatred that you're seeing out there, it's bought and paid for propaganda. And I was commenting on somebody who sent me an email from Pakistan. Every tyranny in history has to have a scapegoat. Somebody to direct the anger and resentment of the people toward, so that they don't direct the anger toward the tyrant. And it's a dodge, and it's been used many times before. Germany, World War II, it was the Jews. Today, it's the Muslims. Other times in history, it's been the Christians, or the Native Americans, or whoever. Now, for those of you who are following 9/11 Truth, we put up a poster at WhatReallyHappened.com. Right now, firefighters, architects, and engineers for 9/11 Truth and architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth are doing a tour through the southwestern United States of America. And you may want to make a point of getting over there and hearing these people talk, and they're going to be debuting a new documentary film on what happened on 9/11. And let's see, on the 3rd of October, they're going to be in Las Vegas. On the 4th of October, they're going to be in Pahrump. 5th of October, Phoenix, Arizona. 6th of October, Albuquerque, New Mexico. 7th of October, Dallas, Texas. 8th of October, Austin, Texas. 9th of October, Houston, Texas. And on the 10th of October, Denver, Colorado. And we're going to have Richard Gage on our show on the 8th. to talk about all of this stuff that's going on. All right, let's take ourselves another phone call. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I've been, on my way driving home, and earlier I was at the gym, and Fox News and all the neocons there, they're having a cow over this whole thing with Russia. I mean, it cracks me up because you're making it look like, this is some kind of, Russian, attempt to take over the entire Middle East. And then it's complaining about the Free Syrians. He's attacking the Free Syrian Army, but only seems like the neocons and the elitists in the media and the government believe that the Free Syrian Army is really not ISIS. Everybody knows they're actually ISIS.
It's all one group. They're sharing weapons back and forth, and you don't need to get into the fine details about what's going on. All you need to do for anybody who thinks that what's going on in Syria, where the U.S. is good and Russia is bad, just remind them of a simple fact. The government of Syria asked Russia for help. The government of Syria has not asked the United States to intervene.
That's right. And it's still the legitimate government of Syria. Assad is the absolute legitimate government.
He won his last election with an 80% majority. And for the U.S. to go in and intervene is a violation of international law and the Charter of the United Nations.
What do you think happened with that bombing when they told him to get the U.S. to get out of the way? You think secretly, on the slide, Obama told him, hey, don't try to, get out of the way or what?
Well, Russia, contrary to what Ashton Carter is out there saying, Russia behaved very properly in notifying the other interests in the region that they were starting a bombing campaign against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And they gave them enough of a warning where it could go out on the radio networks, get your head down, get your planes on the ground. There's going to be a lot of Russian hardware up in the air shooting at things. And so Russia played by the rules, okay? And Russia, I think, is just going to absolutely rush this as fast as possible in order to demonstrate to the world that they can, within a week or two, do what the U.S. failed to do for months on end, get rid of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. It is a huge embarrassment, and you're right, it's almost funny watching how Washington, D.C. and the neocons and the corporate media are trying to salvage this situation. They really
Somebody
are.
also got to bring up this thing that I read in the Jerusalem Post online.
Mark, I'm going to put you on hold, and when we come back from commercials, we'll pick up right from there. All right, we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go right back to the phones. Mark in North Carolina, you had one more point you wanted to make.
Yeah, actually, two quick ones, all right?
Okay.
One is that Israel, I read in the Jerusalem Post online because I was search engine for what's going on with the Israelis treating wounded ISIS soldiers and then sending them back into battle, and I didn't believe it. But sure enough, of all things, the Washington Post admitted it. Well, they said Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra run. But, I mean, this is incredible. The other thing I want to point out is the neocons keep on pointing out that Obama and his red line about the weapons of, nerve gas.
Mm-hmm.
But they say it like this is a foregone conclusion. The fact of the matter is, Assad didn't do that. The so-called Free Syrian Army did it, and he most likely got that nerve gas from our wonderful CIA, probably along with the arms that were shipped from Libya through Turkey and right into Syria. Okay?
Yeah, and again, back when they were trying this whole thing about Assad is using sarin gas on his own people, the story did not make any sense at all. And I think the American people ought to be insulted at the very low opinion the U.S. government has of us, where they came out with this story that Assad used a banned chemical weapon, sarin gas, on his own Alawite supporters right in front of the United Nations chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived in Syria, and couldn't come up with a reason for Assad to actually do something that stupid. And then, of course, ultimately the UN chemical weapons inspectors said, we haven't found any evidence of any of this stuff.
And the mainstream media and the neocons keep pushing this too.
That's it. The motto of the U.S. government and the corporate media is, if at first you don't succeed, lie again. And unfortunately, once a lie is cemented into the government structure, they just keep repeating it. No matter, even with everybody in America knows they're lying, they have to keep repeating the lies, because the first time they admit they lied, it's all going to start unraveling.
You know, Mike, all you got to do is go to some of these online, go to some of the online posts and see what people are commenting on. One after the other. Nobody, including Fox News, Glenn Beck, and all the other neocons there, they're all saying the same thing. Russia is doing what it should be doing. Putin's the good guy. We're actually arming these so-called rebels.
Yes.
Okay, so people are not buying their crap anymore, you know?
Yeah, and I've noticed more and more of the corporate media websites, if they're not banning comments entirely, they're culling out negative comments, and they're certainly banning certain commenters. I've been banned from Reuters. I've been banned from. I didn't keep a list. It's not worth bothering about. But they're trying to basically filter the comments to support the narrative, and even with all of that, it's not working. You're right. Reading the comments is very enlightening, especially because, you know, once you understand that a lot of the people who are commenting on these corporate media websites are paid PR agents there to support the story, they become very, very obvious. They're the ones hurling, you know, tinfoil, conspiracy, wacko. Syria's government may be legitimate, but they're a brutal dictatorship, and that gives us the right to go in. And once you know they're there, they become very, very obvious. Propaganda only works when the targeted population doesn't know they're being propagandized. Once their eyes are open and they see it, it's really very obvious and easy to spot.
I got a suggestion, too, for the audience.
Sure.
Hit their Facebook site as much as you can. Tell them the truth. And also call their neocon, what I call mainstream talk radio shows as much as you can, even if you have to lie to the call screener to get through, and then tell them what you think, or what you know, rather. And that's the way to beat them.
Well, that's one thing to do to beat them, but the way we are beating them now is that we ignore the people who are caught up in the system, who are paid to lie, who are perfectly comfortable with being paid to lie, like a Brian Williams. They don't care. They don't care. As long as they're getting their paycheck, they don't care who's out there criticizing them. What we need to do is continue to educate our fellow Americans, which is to take the articles that you see on these websites, or Facebook posts, and you forward them to all your social media, and you educate the people who are out there who are starting to ask questions. Don't waste your time. Hey, let me finish this thought. Do not waste your time on people who are being paid to argue with you. Go on out and look for those people who are starting to ask questions and be there to give them the answers. And very obviously, the corporate media has lost the war for the minds of America at this point.
I got to Mike Tyson yesterday. I think his name's Mike Peace, whatever his name is.
Yep.
He was talking a bunch of garbage about Donald Trump and talking about Trump, you know, not really wanting to get us involved here in Syria and making it look like he's just like Obama and this and that. So I got onto his Facebook. I found his Facebook and I got a bunch of likes. They liked, and including a comment that they agreed with me what I said. So we can beat them. There's many different ways to beat these people. Okay.
We cheated. We've got the truth on our side, and that makes it very easy to beat them. Lies cannot endure. Time makes ancient truths uncouth, so to speak. And the reality is, just as happened in the Soviet Union, eventually the people catch on to what's been happening. And all the glitzy newsroom sets and all the hot babes in the skimpy clothing are not going to get people believing what's being told. People want the truth, and they're going to go where they think they're going to find it. What brought the Soviet Union down was a network of fax machines. They didn't even have the internet or the computers or like we've got today. They did it all with fax machines, the samizdat.
And folks, don't buy the crap that they're trying to give you, that Putin is nothing but the continuation of the Soviet Union. There is nothing Soviet about Russia today. They are a free, democratic nation. The cross flies where once the hammer and sickle used to fly. The Russian people are a decent, wonderful people, and Putin, I think, is the greatest leader in the world today, bar none. So that's pretty much it.
He is certainly a statesman, beyond all question, and you're absolutely correct. The modern Russian republics are nothing at all like the Soviet Union. The quality of life, standard of living is much better for the Russian people. And I think when our current U.S. government follows the USSR into the dustbin of history, we're going to have a few months of very rough getting along and taking care of each other, but we'll emerge out the other side with a much better nation for we the people.
Well, I pray you're right on that, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We got to let you go. We're coming up on another commercial break here. And when we come on back, some new developments on 9/11 and global warming and all the rest of the stuff that we normally talk about. So we're going to be finishing up this show here on Wednesday. And it's funny watching D.C. and the corporate media try and salvage the situation. I'm not laughing because of the potential for them to try a false flag to reignite the war fever. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And one of the members over at WhatReallyHappened.com is posting this series of flashback articles about all the times it's been reported U.S. dropping weapons and supplies to ISIS in Syria. Israel treating ISIS soldiers in Israel and sending them back. This whole fraud is unraveling. And the government is in a panic. As well they should be. Because once the level of distrust in the population crosses a certain threshold, the government ceases to be effective. We just stop listening to them. We stop filling out the paperwork. We stop paying the bills. We stop sending our children off to die in wars. Apparently, one of the emails that surfaced during today's document dump has Hillary Clinton joking that the Chinese hacked her email. I'm sure they were laughing back at the time. Now, maybe not so much. All right, now let's get on to 9/11 for a little bit. Saudi Arabia was hit with a lawsuit by families of victims of 9/11 who basically said Saudi Arabia is to blame. We are going to sue them for huge amounts of money. Now, this lawsuit was pure public relations right from the start to try and put the blame for 9/11 on Saudi Arabia. And today, the judge basically threw the case out of court. Now, they're trying to put out the headline that Saudi Arabia has sovereign immunity from the charges. And if you actually read into the body of the article, and you should, because headlines are very misleading, and they count on the fact that most Americans just read the headlines and think they know what's going on. But if you actually go into the body of the article, the judge says they didn't make a case that Saudi Arabia had anything to do with 9/11. It was an assertion without any foundation whatsoever. And we're still seeing the propagandists out there trying to somehow put the blame for 9/11 on Saudi Arabia. They're still trying to make a big deal about the classified 28 pages from the 9/11 report. And they've been out there hinting that it lays the blame at Saudi Arabia. I've heard other reports that it lays the blame at Israel, and that's why it was classified. And remember, in Carl Cameron's 4-part series on the Israeli spy ring that was uncovered just before 9/11, Carl Cameron quoted a U.S. government official as saying there was evidence that linked the arrested Mossad agents, the dancing Israelis, to 9/11, but that evidence was classified by the U.S. government. But again, to determine if you are being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a motive, for Saudi Arabia to do 9/11. Because Saudi Arabia has made a huge amount of money off of the United States because of the petrodollar deal. Saudi Arabia has huge amounts of money invested in the United States of America, and they don't want to do anything that would allow the U.S. government to seize those assets. And finally, common sense. If Saudi Arabia wanted to harm the United States, all they have to do is start pulling their money out of the U.S. investments, and the U.S. economy would suffer for it. But again, the motto of the U.S. government, the corporate media, and all these propagandists, if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. And every time we get tired of one lie, they come out with one that's a little bit bigger and a little bit grander until they reach such ridiculous claims that everybody say, oh, come on, this is just, it doesn't pass the smell test anymore. All right, so let's talk about human-caused global warming, because Obama is out there in the midst of all this other situation trying to get us to go along with the carbon tax. The world is going to end. The world is going to end. Now, Arctic sea ice has increased by 37% since 2012. The Arctic ice is still too thick for ships to regularly use the Northwest Passage. Now, back in the 1990s, when the world really was warming, they opened up the Northwest Passage, huzzah, huzzah, great for commercial shipping. Now, it's mostly closed. Now, earlier this year, there was, I believe it was a Canadian icebreaker that had been detailed to support an expedition up to the North Pole to take temperature readings to prove that the Arctic was getting warmer. Not only could the icebreaker not get through the ice to get to the North Pole, it had to be diverted and the expedition called off in order to keep the shipping lanes open. Now, up in Fairbanks, Alaska, right now there are between 7,000 and 9,000 people without electricity because the power was knocked out by the largest ever snowfall to occur in September on record. I got a report from somebody it's snowing in South Carolina right now, and it is still September. Barely. More reports coming in of record cold temperatures, cold season starting earlier than it has been before. And up on Mount Everest, or Sagarmatha, normally every climbing season there are multiple expeditions up to the top. This year, because of the increase in snow and ice, there was only one attempt to reach the summit of Everest, and they had to turn back because of heavy, heavy snow. Now, we're already seeing the corporate media try and come on out and deal with the reality that we are headed into another harsh winter. And we're seeing all these stories that are basically pushing the same idea. Yes, there are cold snaps here and there, and where you are and where your family and friends all are. And yeah, there's some cold here and there. But trust us, overall, it's warmer. It's warmer everywhere. The heat is hiding in the bottom of the ocean, which violates the principle of convection. And they've got another embarrassment because they've been claiming warming ocean, and all of a sudden there's an ice-cold spot showing up in the middle of the Atlantic that shouldn't be there according to the computer models. So having failed to sell the idea of a carbon tax, the EPA, which declared carbon dioxide a toxic pollutant in order to push this agenda forward. And remember, carbon dioxide is not a toxic pollutant. It is essential to life on Earth. Plants need it. So that same Environmental Protection Agency has come out with a statement that sunlight is now dangerous to plants, which triggered an absolute firestorm of hilarity and ridicule on social media. So what are they going to do? Say, we've abandoned the carbon tax, but you have to pay a sunlight tax. The sun is now a problem. Actually, in a way, they're right. The sun is a problem because solar output is not a constant. It fluctuates over time, and it's heading into a period of decreased activity because all of the known solar cycles, and we don't know that we know them all, the low points are lining up over the next decade. And we're having a new Maunder minimum, and with it we will have a new mini ice age, and Al Gore will still be out there screaming that humans are warming the planet. And apparently, Al Gore has launched a new campaign to recruit young children out of schools to spread climate gospel. That's their actual word, climate gospel. They're treating it as a religion. You will worship the earth. You will believe humans are harming the earth. And they're recruiting from middle school and high school age kids to turn them into climate fanatics, to sell the carbon tax to their parents. It's amazing. All righty, we're coming up here on, well, actually, I got a few more seconds here. Apparently, because of Obamacare and sky-high prescription medication, more and more people are simply not buying prescription medications. This is forcing drug companies to raise prices. What happens? People don't buy the medicines anymore. They're turning to alternatives. So now they're going to try and ban all the alternatives. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I probably ought to reprise that video to the front of WhatReallyHappened.com. It's Claire's music, and we put a video to it, and it's been very, very effective here. Let's talk about vaccinations. As you know, New Jersey just recently passed a law called Hawley's Law, named for a very young girl who was killed by vaccinations. Now, apparently over in Worcester, Massachusetts, there has been another tragedy. 2-year-old girl, perfectly healthy, Gigi, given the mandatory vaccinations, died 2 days later. Meanwhile, up in the state of Maine, their Supreme Court has ruled the state can vaccinate your children without the permission of the parents. Parents have nothing to say with it. Your children belong to the state. They are the property of the state. You do nothing but breed them, and we will take them and make them what we want to do. Now, I want to remind everybody of something. Any law that says you will be forced to undergo any kind of medical treatment without your consent is a violation of the Nuremberg Code. It is a war crime. No medical treatment can be administered to anybody without informed consent. And that was put in the Nuremberg Code because of the abuses of Nazi Germany, which was sticking needles in all kinds of people for all kinds of purposes. And here we are. The U.S. government treats us all like livestock, like property. Like they will decide what food we can eat, what food we can't eat. Not allowed to know if it's GMO. They'll decide what medications we're forced to take. And we don't really know what's in those needles. Most of us do not have the facilities at home to take a sample of the vaccine and find out if it contains things that we really don't want in our bodies. Like peanut oil. Peanut oil is used as a vaccine adjuvant and is apparently the cause of this peanut anaphylaxis epidemic that's killing people all over the country. Remember, the CDC got exposed for issuing a completely bogus report that attempted to say there's no connection between autism and vaccines. One of the CDC scientists who wrote the report came forward and said it was all cherry-picked data. It's not real. It's a CDC sales brochure for the big pharmaceutical companies. Now, a lot of attention has recently focused on a gentleman named Paul Offit, who is the corporate media's darling to direct against anybody who doubts the safety and efficacy and wisdom of vaccines. Now, Paul Offit works at the Philadelphia Children's Hospital, and he's been exposed for making up completely out of thin air fables about vaccine safety, smear campaigns against investigative journalists like Cheryl Atkinson, Kathleen Seidel, and it came out that he is in fact getting paid by the vaccine manufacturers. He's getting grants for what is politely termed public outreach, going on out and putting the propaganda. Offit tried to smear the Cheryl Atkinson for sending abusive, mean-spirited emails from CBS News. CBS checked their email server. The emails didn't exist. There's big money in vaccines. And again, I want to remind everybody, out in California, there was a petition movement to overturn Senate Bill 277. And the people collecting the petitions were convinced they'd gone way over the minimum number of signatures required, and all of a sudden they go to deliver the signatures and boxes are missing. Who would do a thing like that? North Carolina is now going to enact a law saying that if your children don't submit to the government-mandated vaccinations, they will not be allowed in the public schools. Good. Homeschool them. Put them in private schools. Homeschooling is now illegal. Your kid has to go to public school and he must have the vaccinations and we will tell you how to raise your child. No, you won't. I'm a great believer in parental rights. Now, getting onto the world of computers, apparently Mark Zuckerberg was caught on an open microphone, basically acknowledging Facebook is deleting all posts that are opposed to the migrant situation, of letting migrants into Europe, of letting them into the United States. If you are on Facebook and you put up anything critical of the immigration crisis, whether it's coming from Mexico, Central America, Syria, or Libya, Facebook will delete them. Now then, if you are a user of the TrueCrypt encryption software, apparently there's been a discovered flaw or a backdoor that would allow an encrypted message to compromise your system. That sounds more like a backdoor than a flaw to me. There's apparently another vulnerability that's been discovered in the WinRAR archiving application that would allow your system to be attacked by a specially encoded RAR file. I think they're beginning to stumble across all these NSA backdoors that they've put in to maintain control over the computers and the Internet because it's a threat to the money junkies. Security firm Akamai, which by the way is the Hawaiian word for wisdom, has discovered a Linux botnet that can generate 150 gigabits per second distributed denial of service attacks. I've been a victim of those on a couple of times, and apparently it spreads via a Trojan variant dubbed XOR DDoS, and it infects Linux systems through embedded devices like network routers, and then brute forces secure shell access. Once it has secure shell access, it can do whatever they want. And if it's using an embedded device like a network router, that tells us the network routers have backdoors. And that, in turn, tells us that this Linux botnet, more likely than not, is another creation of the National Security Agency. Now, Apple is drawing criticism because over on the App Store, they've had an app that displays U.S. drone strikes into foreign nations as soon as the data becomes available. So you can sort of have a real-time view of just who the U.S. government is murdering today. And Apple has suddenly withdrawn the app from the online store without explanation. You're not supposed to know who the U.S. government is murdering today. Now, getting on back to the world of GMOs, more and more European countries are banning GMO. They're exercising their option under the European Union rules that they can opt out, they can exempt out, and they want to. And the big reason to ban GMO labeling here in the United States of America is that Monsanto has to sell that stuff to somebody, and if the rest of the world won't eat it, by golly, you, the American people, will eat it, and you will like it. Because that's how the United States of America works. We will tell you what you're going to eat. You're not allowed to know what's in your fodder today. How much of it is wood pulp and filler and other chemicals? Most Americans, I don't think, even know what real food tastes like anymore. Those Michelle Obama lunches in the school appear to be a campaign to train future Americans into eating factory-produced pap and thinking it's good nutrition. Another article coming out, this is over in PatriotRising.com, Monsanto has been caught. They deliberately covered up data they had proving glyphosate isn't a carcinogen, and they've known for 40 years that glyphosate causes cancer. But it's good for the economy because if you get cancer from glyphosate, you have to spend more of your money in the cancer industry. That's how it all works, except we don't have any more money. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. Thanks to everybody who is calling their local talk show stations and suggesting GCNlive.com. As you heard the other day, we're picking up affiliates down in the Virgin Islands. We're picking up affiliates all over the planet. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.